good evening, and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from the newest issue of History Magazine. Now, normally I would let you guys vote on which articles you wanted me to read on my community tab, but I was reading through the main ones and they weren't so great. This big article on Nefertiti wasn't really that interesting, to be honest. There's not a lot of information on her life, so it was mostly speculation and facts about archaeological digs and things, which is interesting, but I wanted to know more about Nefertiti. But anyway, this was a really great article on the Battle of Thermopylae, but I literally just did like a whole video on the Battle of Thermopylae like a week and a half ago, so I didn't want to repeat that. This one was the best article, but it was an excerpt from my Lost Cities Ancient Tombs book, which I'm reading through anyway, so there's no point in me reading this. And then this article on the Taj Mahal was also kind of dry. It wasn't really that interesting, to be honest. Gorgeous pictures, but the article itself was kind of boring, to be honest. So here's what we're gonna do tonight. Oh, and then there's another article about the Stone Age Venuses, which I thought was a really great article, but it's a lot of descriptions of female anatomy in these ancient little figurines, which I have no problem with discussing on the channel, but I don't know if YouTube will, so I'm a little hesitant to read out that much about female anatomy and things like that. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to read some of the little extra sections here, like the mini ones. We're going to read about Ellen Craft and her husband, who are people I'd never heard of, and it's a really great story. We're going to learn about how Egypt worshipped the catfish, which I also didn't know, the history of the fork, and there's always a section that highlights a work of art, and this one is so cool because they usually do paintings, and this one they do a pectoral from Monte Alban, which is really an amazing pectoral. So I'm going to read those to you tonight. So let's just dive right in. Here we go. Starting with Ellen Craft, The Appearance of Freedom. Squish this down a little and let's read. It says, born into slavery, Ellen Craft and her husband William rejected that fate for their children. Escaping from Georgia to Pennsylvania, the couple used her white skin to hide in plain sight. In the 1800s, many enslaved people in the United States, especially those who lived in the Deep South, made valiant efforts to escape to freedom in the North. Many of the most well-known stories, like that of Harriet Tubman and the people she helped ferry along the Underground Railroad, took place under the cover of darkness to avoid slave patrols and other local authorities. But Ellen Craft and her husband William took a different approach. Their daring escape took place in the broad light of day. The organizers. Ellen Craft was born in 1826 in Clinton, Georgia. Her father, Colonel James Smith, was a white man and her first enslaver. Her mother, Maria, an African-American woman, was also owned by Smith. Ellen was fair-skinned and resembled Smith and the children of his marriage, so much so that people frequently mistook her for one of them. Tradition says that it was this resemblance that led to Ellen's owner giving her at age 11 to his daughter, Ellen's half-sister, as a wedding gift in 1837. Young Ellen went to live in Macon, Georgia, about 15 miles from where she was born. She worked as a maid there. History did not record when and how Ellen met the man who became her husband, William Craft. He was born in rural Georgia in 1824. The same person enslaved his entire family but cruelly separated them through the course of William's childhood. In his memoir, William recalled, "My old master also sold a dear brother and a sister in the same manner as he did my father and mother. The reason he assigned for disposing of my parents, as well as of several other aged slaves, was that they were getting old and would soon become valueless in the market." William himself was sold at age 16. He had been apprenticed to a cabinet maker as a child, and his skills were so strong that his new owner hired him out as a carpenter to other slaveholders. William was paid for his work, and despite his owner collecting most of his earnings, he was allowed to keep a small portion of his wages for himself. Though Ellen and William were considered property and still enslaved, they had privileges. Among them was obtaining passes from their owners, allowing them to leave their homes and travel to places around Macon. Careful plans. The Crafts married in 1846, but were concerned about starting a family. Owing to the traumas of family separation in their youth, they wisely feared being separated from their own children. The only way they could build a family and future together was to escape Georgia. At the time, the state held one of the largest populations of enslaved people in the country, so any plans to escape would need to be cautious and clever. Knowing the difficulties of trying to escape during the night, the two had devised a plan to outsmart enslavers and slave patrols. They would travel by day to the northern states, using Ellen's fair skin to hide in plain sight. Ellen would pose as William's owner, but the two quickly recognized that people would be skeptical of a white woman traveling alone with a black man. They decided Ellen would pose as a young white man. She began by cutting her hair short and dressing in men's clothing. She donned a top hat and green spectacles to cover the fear in her eyes because she was anxious of someone catching them along the trip. Ellen also applied a poultice to her face to cover the fact that she lacked facial hair. Neither William nor Ellen had learned to read or write, as it was illegal in the state of Georgia to teach an enslaved person how. This led to them bandaging Ellen's arm as well to prevent her from having to sign any of the registration papers for travel or lodging. If they were asked by anyone why they were traveling up north, their story was that they were going to see a special doctor, whereby the bandages would indicate injury or disease. Trains, carriages, and boats. On December 21st, 1848, Ellen and William began their journey. After first obtaining passes to leave their residences, they disguised themselves, made their way to the Macon train station, and departed for Savannah, Georgia. On the train, Ellen realized she was sitting next to a dear friend of her owner. Anxious and fearful, she relaxed after he spoke to her and said, "It is a very fine morning, sir." Although she was relieved that her disguise was working, Ellen acted as if she was deaf for the remainder of the train ride to avoid conversing with him. Once they arrived in Savannah, they found a carriage and quickly made their way to a steamboat departing for Charleston, South Carolina. There was no seating on the boat for enslaved people, so William found a spot near the funnel of the ship where he sat until morning. The next morning, the captain was thoroughly impressed at the young master's very attentive boy and warned Ellen to beware of cutthroat abolitionists in the northern states who would entice William to run away. The trip was full of fraught encounters. A slave trader made Ellen an offer to buy William and to take him to the deep south. A military officer scolded her for saying thank you to William. When the couple arrived in Charleston, they were able to stay at the best hotel in town. There the clerks greeted the invalid with great care, giving them a nice room and good table in the dining hall. From Charleston, they took another steamboat to Wilmington, North Carolina, and from there, a train to Richmond, Virginia. When they reached Baltimore, Maryland, on December 24th, 1848, the couple was one stop away from freedom in Pennsylvania. The Crafts had learned of conductors prohibiting enslaved people from traveling to Philadelphia. A Baltimore conductor did halt them momentarily to validate that William belonged to Ellen. Another conductor, seeing Ellen's bandages, intervened and allowed them to board the train. They were on their way. On Christmas Day, the Crafts made it to Philadelphia. Ellen cried out, "Thank God, William, we're safe." Farther to freedom. Ellen and William stayed in Philadelphia for a short time. Less than a month after arriving, the two moved to a free black community in Boston, Massachusetts, a hotbed of abolitionist activity in the United States. Luminaries such as Frederick Douglass and William Lord Garrison were among the leaders of the movement. In Boston, tales of their daring escape from Georgia earned them great respect. They quickly became loud voices in the abolitionist movement and traveled around New England to speak out about the horrors of slavery down south. Ellen and William's beginnings in Boston seemed promising. William returned to being a successful cabinet maker, and Ellen worked as a seamstress. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made their lives uneasy. The law made it illegal for residents of free states like Massachusetts to harbor or aid fugitive slaves. It also made it possible for federal officials to seize suspected escapees and send them back without any trial. Lucrative rewards were made for capturing suspected escaped enslaved people. The Crafts found themselves targets of bounty hunters from Macon, Georgia. Willis Hughes and John Knight attempted to capture the Crafts in Boston. An interracial group of Bostonians called the Vigilance Committee protected Ellen and William. They moved them to different safe houses around Boston and even outside the city to prevent them from being captured. The Fugitive Slave Act's threat of kidnapping made it impossible for the Crafts to stay in the United States. To protect themselves, Ellen and William moved to London, England, where they became leading voices in the anti-slavery movement there. William authored a book about their experiences, running 1,000 miles for freedom. After spending nearly 2 decades in England and having 5 children, the Crafts returned to Georgia. They settled near Savannah, where they opened a farm school to educate newly freed black students. Isn't that a great story? I've never ever heard of Ellen and William Craft before. And I also did not know this about the catfish of the Nile, the whiskered icon of Egypt. At the dawn of ancient Egypt, the remarkable catfish occupied an important part of Egyptian cosmology. Its survival abilities became a symbol of both power and protection. Cobras, cats, and vultures are among the most popular animals depicted in Egyptian art, but the humble catfish once reigned supreme in the iconography of the civilization by the Nile. Common to every continent except Antarctica, catfish are the most diverse group of fish on Earth. The 2,000 to 3,000 species have some remarkable characteristics, so it is little wonder they attracted the attention of the Egyptians, one of the most animal-conscious ancient cultures. Named for its feline-like whiskers, called barbels, a catfish has finely honed senses that allow it to survive and find food in murky, muddy waters. One family of catfish has a respiratory system that allows it to use atmospheric oxygen. This is most spectacularly employed by the walking catfish, familiar today as an invasive species in Florida, which uses its fins to waddle over land. The ancient Egyptians had intimate knowledge of the several species of catfish that they observed among the rich life of the Nile River. Individual species are often clearly identifiable in Egyptian art and iconography. A gold pendant from the early 2nd millennium BCE is so naturalistic it can be easily identified as the upside-down catfish, the Synodontis botansoda, whose flipped orientation allows it to position its mouth close to the water's surface, from where it appears to be swimming upside down. Catfish for kings. Most of the animals associated with ancient Egypt were popular in the iconography of the New Kingdom. The humble catfish was an icon thousands of years before then, during the Middle and Old Kingdoms and even the pre-dynastic period. The catfish's use as icon can be traced back to one of the oldest Egyptian artifacts, the Narmer palette. Around 3000 BCE, Narmer is said to have led Upper Egypt in its conquest of Lower Egypt. thereby uniting the land and founding Egypt's first dynasty. The palette depicts Narmer striking down an enemy with a mace. Archaeologists know the victorious figure is Narmer because his name appears above him. It consists of two hieroglyphs, NR, Catfish, and MR, Chisel. You can see right here, there's a little depiction of it. There's the catfish, the chisel, for Narmer's name. In their names, pharaohs would attempt to align themselves with the kind of wild animals that would command respect. The aggressive, controlling power of wild animals is a common theme in elite of the late pre-dynastic period, wrote Egyptologist Toby A.H. Wilkinson. Within the belief system of the late pre-dynastic period, the catfish was evidently viewed as a symbol of domination and control, an ideal motif with which to associate the king. Look at this. The catfish. So cool. Catfish were depicted on several significant tomb reliefs from this early period. One of the most well-known is the Mastaba of Tai, a 5th century noble whose tomb in Saqqara features several friezes of catfish and fishermen. Another example is the Mastaba of Kagemni, vizier to the 6th century King Teti, at Saqqara. A relief in this tomb depicts a fishing scene in which men in papyrus skiffs appear to be pursuing fish of different types, including the whiskery catfish. Fishy symbols. Many species of catfish live in the Nile. The one on the Narmer palette has been identified as belonging to the genus Heterobranchus. Another type of catfish, Malapterourus electricus, the electric catfish, was very literally a source of shock and awe to Egyptians. Its maximum charge of 350 volts can stun prey and deter predators, and deliver a non-lethal but painful shock to humans. Its representation on Old Kingdom reliefs of fishermen are the world's earliest known depictions of these creatures. Egyptians attributed rich symbolic and mythological roles to the catfish. The upside-down catfish especially was imbued with symbolic importance. Belly up on the surface, it appeared dead but was clearly alive, suggesting regeneration. Amulets of these creatures have been found throughout Old and Middle Kingdom sites in Egypt. These objects, it was believed, prevented drowning and were worn as necklaces or as hair ornaments. The catfish's ability to navigate the murky bottom of the Nile seemed to give it magical qualities. The Egyptians believed that the catfish could guide the solar bark that bore the sun disk through the darkness of the underworld. Since the underworld was conceived of as a watery realm, the catfish could continue to protect people after death as well as in life. Next, something I bet you've never thought about, how forks were invented. The fork, a new way to set the table. Introduced to Europe from medieval Byzantium, the fork was initially scorned as unnatural and pretentious. Only by the 1800s was its conquest of the dining room complete. For late 19th century North Americans and Europeans, a fork, and the ability to use it with ease, was a reflection of good taste. A display of such tableware could reveal much about someone's social status, as the wealthy took great care to procure different types of forks for everything from salad to pastry. A special fork was even invented with which to eat ice cream, a spork-like instrument, the form of a spoon, with 3 or 4 tines. The centrality of the fork in Victorian-era dining etiquette would, however, have surprised earlier generations. It was, in fact, a newcomer to the utensil drawer, having only won widespread use in Europe by the close of the 18th century, and in America as late as the mid-1800s. Until then, people of all classes had eaten with what seemed the only utensils necessary: a knife to cut and spear and a spoon to scoop. Oh, down here. Although the fork's path to the table was hard-won and slow, it probably started, in domestic terms at least, not all that far away, in the kitchen itself. In ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, Cooking forks were used for carving or lifting meats from a cauldron or fire. Following a reduction in size, the fork appears to have entered dining areas in the courts of the Middle East and Byzantine Empire by the 8th and 9th centuries, and become common among wealthy families there by the 10th century. Early in the 11th century, it crops up in graphic form in various pieces of European art, most notably a 1023 edition of a medieval encyclopedia by the 9th century scholar Rabanus Maurus, which depicts a man eating with the new utensil. There he goes. In the late 11th century, the Bishop of Ostia, St. Peter Damian, condemned the fork. He wrote of a Byzantine princess who traveled to Venice to marry and brought a set of forks with her. She deigned not to touch her food with her fingers, but would command her eunuchs to cut it up into small pieces, which she would impale on a certain golden instrument with 2 prongs and thus carry to her mouth. She later died of the plague, which Damien interpreted as punishment for such luxury. Turning the tables. Despite such disapproval, the fork's slow conquest of Europe was carried out from Italy. By the 1400s, Florence's ruling Medici family had 56 silver forks in their kitchen. Wow. Traveling to France to marry Henry II in 1533, Catherine de' Medici became the emissary of the fork in the royal court. She ran into immediate resistance. It was scorned as an affectation and provoked hilarity when food fell off. English travel writer Thomas Coryat was very impressed with the utensil during a visit to Italy. Writing in a 1611 travel account, Coryat's crudities, he said, "The Italian cannot by any means endure to have his dish touched with fingers, seeing all men's fingers are not alike clean. Hereupon I myself thought good to imitate the Italian fashion." He was mocked for doing so. The 18th century author Johann Beckmann noted the English lampooned the utensil as an effeminate piece of finery. Even so, motivated by the same concerns for hygiene, European upper classes began to use the fork. By the 18th century, it had caught on in the wider population. Forks with 3 or 4 tines proved more practical, and curves were added to make scooping up food easier. These improvements paved the way for the boom in fork varieties. These were enthusiastically bought by wealthy Britons, inspired by Queen Victoria, who regarded the fork use as a sign of refinement. And she set all the trends, didn't she? The fork's introduction to North America is traced to 1633, when John Winthrop, a founder of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, was gifted a dining set. It included a fork for the useful application of which I leave to your discretion, an admission that its function was not clear to the giver. At first, fork use in America was confined to the wealthy, and its spread through the wider population was slower than in Europe. By the mid-19th century, the utensil had been adopted by the masses in the United States. The Industrial Revolution cemented the fork's presence on dining room tables as production of flatware became faster and less expensive. Writing in 1896 in Social Etiquette, Maud C. Cook declared the fork had finally subjugated the knife in America, and any attempt to give the knife undue prominence at the table is looked upon as a glaring offense against good taste. And finally, check this pectoral out. So this is really intense, and over here it shows you how this kind of jewelry was worn. So here's a warrior and there's his pectoral. So that would have sat on someone's chest. Isn't that intense? Let's read about it. Mixtec masterpiece. A stunning pectoral worn around the neck by a Mixtec dignitary was one of more than 120 gold pieces found in a tomb in southern Mexico's ancient city of Monte Alban. The figure's complexity has led to several different symbolic interpretations. The rich pre-Columbian past of Mexico state of Oaxaca was largely hidden until archaeologist Alfonso Caso began his work there in 1930. Focusing on the ancient mountaintop city of Monte Alban, Caso determined that the site had served as the capital of the Zapotec Empire for more than 1,000 years, but by the year 700 it had fallen into decline. The Zapotec abandoned the city, and their successors, the Mixtec, came to power by 900. They would rule until 1521, after which date the Spanish extended their conquest of the region. During their occupation, the Mixtec reused Monte Alban's Zapotec structures, including royal tombs. Caso uncovered 20 buildings and 176 tombs at the site. In 1932, after tunneling through a wall of an elite residence, he discovered Tomb 7, considered by many to be the most spectacular find ever made in Mesoamerica. The tomb dates to about 1330. It contained more than 500 objects, including more than 120 gold ornaments, whose craftsmanship revealed the Mixtec as the most skilled goldsmiths of central and southern Mexico. They excelled in lost wax casting, producing ornamental objects such as pectorals, just chest ornaments hung from the neck, pendants, necklaces, and other items. One of the most stunning finds was a formidable golden pectoral, which Caso described as perhaps the most beautiful Mexican gold figure we know of. Dazzling to behold, the pectoral also contains important information about Mixtec culture and the complex symbolic language in their art. Questions of identity. The Mixtec codices, another major discovery of Caso's from Monte Alban, have provided important context for the pectoral and for determining whom it might depict. Written on deerskin, the codices narrate the Mixtec origin myths and complicated genealogy of their rulers, priests, and warriors. Along with the Maya dynastic record, they provide the only known documentary history of the pre-Columbian New World. Caso's studies of the Mixtec calendar systems allowed him to interpret the artwork on the pectoral's shoulders. He concluded that each piece corresponded to different calendars that could be cross-referenced with calendar reform in the codices. Using this information, Caso believed the pectoral to depict a ruler known as Lord Five Lizard. A person's name and number is set by their date of birth in the Mixtec calendar. Some scholars, such as Geoffrey McCafferty, Professor Emeritus of Archaeology at the University of Calgary, have different interpretations. He believes the pectoral depicts Lady Threeflint because the serpent headdress is the same one she wears in one of the codices, which leads him to think the pectoral was worn by her descendant, known as Lady Four-Rabbit, who would have worn it as an heirloom to legitimize her ancestry. Today, the pectoral and other treasures from Tomb 7 of Monte Alban are housed at the Museum of Cultures in Oaxaca in Santo Domingo, Mexico. So these apparently depict calendars. There's the big headdress. I don't know, it's a masculine looking face with the square jawline. I don't know, maybe it was the queen. But it's so beautiful, so intricate. Anyway, that's going to be it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good